There are some disciplines that are doing really well and are making good inroads, and if anything have more women than men, but then there are others which are very much, very far behind, and possibly based on current practices and current initiatives, I suppose, will still never reach gender equity.
The Rational View. The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this podcast, I want to continue my focus on communication of science and gender issues in STEM fields. The previous podcast on this series, I surveyed women going into the field of science, as well as a professional female engineer, to get their opinions anecdotally on the state of the field and their ideas about what we should be doing. In this episode, I'm going to be interviewing an expert in the field of gender and STEM and communicating science. As always, if you like my podcast, please hit like and share it with your friends. Come join us on my Facebook discussion group, The Rational View, if you want to chat with the experts. Dr. Merryn McKinnon's original degree was in marine science, where after the novelty of moving intertidal snails with a paint scraper wore off, she discovered that talking about her research to other people brought her far closer to her conservation goals than her actual project ever could. This led her to the field of science communication, where she has stayed ever since, working in a range of roles and countries. Merryn enjoys the diverse issues science communication allows her to explore, applying her innovative thinking and problem-solving skills. Merryn has worked and conducted qualitative and quantitative research nationally and internationally in both non-academic and academic roles. She regularly contributes to ABC Radio on ABC Sydney's Nightlife and Radio National's Research Filter, talking about interesting science from around the world. Merryn designs and delivers science communication workshops as well as workshops specifically for women in STEM. Merryn's research contributes to a better understanding of the relationship between science, media, and the public. She conducts research which explores why publics react and respond to scientific issues the way they do in a variety of different disciplines, including public health and conservation science. She is actively building a research program exploring the influence of equity, inclusion, and intersectionality in STEM, especially STEM communication. Dr. McKinnon, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming on. So, this struck me in your bio. Why were you moving intertidal snails?
It's a question I often ask myself during the course of that research. I was really looking, so there's a species of limpet, and they're like really slow-moving, very small cows. They have this raspy tongue and they scrape algae off the rocks. And I thought, what happens if you have lots of limpets and they're all grazing in a particular area? What does that do to the diversity of the species in that area?
Okay.
So I had some sections where I'd leave them alone, others where I'd remove half of them, and others where I'd remove all of them. And that was why I moved intertidal snails.
And you came to the realization that this wasn't achieving your personal goals. Tell me a bit about your journey to becoming a communications expert and gender issues person.
It was actually mid paint scrape and count. I grew up by the beach, and I really wanted to do something to help protect this environment, which I loved. And the beach was and still is my happy place, even though I live inland now. And I was counting the snails. So once you move the limpets, then you actually have to count what's left. And so I was counting these tiny little snail species. If you imagine poppy seeds, they're about that big and that,
wow.
that painful. So trying to count these, so I'm head down, bum up on a rock platform. And I saw two kids. There was about girl who was about 8, boy, your younger brother, probably about 6. And I could see them watching me like, crazy lady, what the heck is she doing? And eventually they came over and they said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm counting the species that live here. Like the animals that live here. Like, animals? What animals? What are you talking about? So I said, oh, look, well, you've got all of these different creatures. So you've got this one. And I was showing them all of the different animals that were living all over the rocks. And eventually they were satisfied that I wasn't completely nuts and left. And then a little while later, the younger brother was kicking at some barnacles on the rock platform, and his older sisters come charging over, smacked him upside the head and said, don't do that, you'll hurt the animals. And it was one of those real, I felt like a cartoon character, you know, the light bulb appears. And I was, oh, if I talk to people about the place that they're in, if I talk to them about what's going on, that can actually change things. Mm-hmm. And at that time, trying to get into marine science, I could get a PhD and possibly still not get a job, or even if I did, I would have been earning roughly the same amount as I was waitressing. So I was kind of like, yeah, okay, what am I doing here? Let's explore this talky thing. So yeah, went into science communication and answered an ad in the newspaper. So a physical newspaper that immediately gives people clues as to my age. But was an ad that says, do you have a science degree? Do you love to travel? I'm like, well, yes and yes. Tell me more. And so went and did a 1-year program, and that completely changed my life. All
it was a 1-year program, like an educational program?
Yeah, it was a graduate diploma then. It's a master's program now, and you learn a lot about science communication, so the theory, the fundamentals, but the practical part of it was you went on the road with the science circus and did science shows for schools and community groups, and it's still running today. I think it's about 35 years old.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
It's awesome. Yeah, a lot of fun.
So I'm interested, I'm trying to do a few podcasts on gender issues in STEM fields and explore, you know, where are we at and where do we need to get to? So you're an expert in this. You've done some research. How are we doing? Where are we at with gender equity in STEM?
It really depends where you look. And you know, I worked as a woman in STEM and STEM communication for 10 years before I started doing any kind of academic work. And then it's something that I've sort of come to and really started engaging with in the last 5 years, I suppose. And that seemed to coincide with roughly the same time scale when, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but certainly in Australia, it was kind of like, oh, wait, women do this stuff too. It's like, no, really? Welcome. So there's this realization. I think there's a lot of realization now of actually it is different for women, and it's different for different women as well. It's not enough to sort of say, oh, well, there's men's issues and there's women's issues. There are a lot of issues on both sides. But I think gender's probably the most visible issue for people to tackle. In some disciplines, there's already parity, more or less. Certainly in the junior levels, it's once, you know, you have the scissor so you have more women than men, perhaps in the early career stages. But as soon as you get to the senior stages, then suddenly it completely flips. So there are some disciplines that are doing really well and are making good inroads, and if anything, have more women than men. But then there are others which are very much, very, very far behind, and possibly based on current practices and current initiatives, I suppose, will still never reach gender equity.
Yeah, it's not the observation you make is interesting. The junior levels are close to equity, but the senior levels retain this inversion. It's not, and some fields, it's not all fields of STEM. Like some fields, or is it all fields? The gender is inverted.
It's difficult. Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to answer for all fields in all countries. So I think it's fairly consistent in most fields that the senior positions are held by men, in my experience and in my context. So yeah, there may be exceptions to that rule, but if you wanted to make a broad, sweeping, partially substantiated statement, that would be it.
That's just what we're here for on The Rational View. No, that's the reason we're talking to you, is to get the good statements that are backed up by evidence out to the people, and so we're not dealing in anecdotes and estimates. So it seems, and this is kind of my feeling from talking to other people as well, that there's a lot of good programs getting women to enter STEM fields. As you say, the junior levels are roughly equal, but the women don't stick around. What is the barrier? Why do women leave STEM fields and not continue on to these senior positions? Are they being held back? Is it? Well, what do you think are the factors that contribute to
that? How long is this podcast? How long have we got? So this is something I was involved with a 10-year plan for women in STEM. So the decadal plan for women in STEM, organised through the Australian Academy of Science, and we set out to really explore this. So we looked at all of the available evidence, all of the available data, and we also conducted national consultations. The short answer is it begins pretty much from childhood. So you are, from the time you're born, you are being exposed to these gender stereotypes and gender roles. So if you imagine going down to your local department store, you want to buy a present for a niece or a nephew, there's a very distinct girls section and boys section, and the boys have all of the construction, the trucks, the mechanics, the engineering related stuff, the dirty stuff, and it's all blue or darker colors. And the girls get lots of pinks and purples, and it's fluffy animals, and it's things to look after and mother and nurse. And they immediately start to set these expectations of this is what girls do and that's what boys do, and that then gets reinforced. So although you may have some excellent teachers, and this is absolutely me not putting this on teachers at all, like society is to blame, it's all of us, but then you also have some teachers who may be operating on their own potentially unconscious bias as well. Oh, boys are going to be more interested in this, and are you sure you want to do that? That could be quite hard, dear. And this resonates with a lot of stories that I've heard from women around the world as well, sort of teachers wanting to encourage, but in trying to encourage and support can also start to seed some of these insecurities and doubts. And so once you get to that, then you actually enter into the upper levels and you go to university. And if you look at computer science and engineering, it's really common for me to hear from female students, I'm the only female in a room full of 50 men.
Yeah.
It's different and it's difficult, and you have to have either a support network within or external to, or really strong resilience and a desire to persist in that environment. Some of them are great and they do have male allies and supporters, and there's no issue whatsoever, but others find that it isn't very welcoming and they are made to feel very other. And then that can just continue, and you do have good people making a difference everywhere around the world. Trouble is, you do have to also then try and counteract all of the other things. Yeah.
I've spoken to women in the fields of STEM, and that's one message that I hear consistently going into a male-dominated field. Like, you have to work twice as hard. Well, that's not inspirational to a lot of people. It's a very difficult field.
It's not. Yeah, it is, and it's interesting because there is this concept of merit. Well, the best person will get the job. Like, why do we actually need to have, say, gender quotas or something like that? If it's merit-based, then the right person will be getting it. Okay, but take a step back from that. Who is determining what is best? Who is actually saying this is what merit looks like? They're probably a bunch of middle-aged, white, Western men who have had a support network, who have had every opportunity and every access to every resource. And if they think, well, this is what good looks like, then everybody else needs to meet this benchmark. But if you don't have that social capital, that access to the resources, the mentor or the supporter who's helping to bring you along, if you don't have the networks to ask for internships or opportunities like that, if you are a carer for a child, a sibling, another family member, a parent, you have more limited opportunity. And so even from low socioeconomic backgrounds as well, you may not have that same access to opportunity and quality education. So by sort of drawing the line in the sand and saying, this is what merit looks like, and this is the target, and if we just use this, then everyone has equal opportunity. No, they don't. And the opportunity started way back. So that's why we do use things like research opportunity statements or blinded selection processes or the affirmative action measures, because not everyone is starting from the same place.
Indeed. That's good insight, I think. One thing that I notice is that the career path for academics is not suitable or not conducive to someone who wants to raise a family. You basically have to go on starvation, slave wages for postdoctoral positions for 3, 6, 9 years before you can get a professorship or an appointment at a university. And if the way that society is right now, that women are expected to be responsible for children and men are expected to go into the workforce, it just doesn't work for a lot of women. If you want to, if it's the woman's responsibility to be the nurturer and the caregiver, the way that science STEM is set up just doesn't work for that. Is there anything we can do about to fix that? What should we be doing?
Realistically, there is nothing beyond giving birth and breastfeeding. And I mean, some women physically can't breastfeed, so even that isn't a fundamental prerequisite. Beyond that, there is nothing that says men can't nurture and care. And I know my own husband and my brother-in-law, they're very involved in their kids' lives, and their relationship with their children is very important to them. And I think for most, if not all dads, it's the same. And even in any partnership, you're going to have a caregiver and someone who is working, but you can also shoulder that load equally if it's financially possible to do so. But I think there is this kind of social stigma, yes, or this expectation that you are man, you shall not cook or clean or nurture small people. I think that's doing a disservice to men, and I think it's doing a disservice to their kids too, because they don't get that same kind of bonding opportunity and that same kind of relationship until later in life. And sometimes it ends up being an opportunity lost. And I don't think anybody benefits from this existing status quo. Yeah. I mean, in the Nordic states, they've enforced sort of this 50-50 split. And while it's still not a perfect system, it also demonstrates that the world doesn't spin off its axis if you actually ask both parents to parent equally. So I think it really comes back to these societal expectations of who does what.
Yeah, I think if there's an expectation that men will take time off to nurture their own kids, that goes a long ways to leveling the workload, because in a lot of countries, the women are the only ones that take time off, and whether that's because of policies or tradition, it basically has a lasting burden on them as the kids move through school and other things. They are responsible for that whole workload by inertia, effectively. What are parental leave policies like in Australia? I know in Canada we have, we've opened it up to dads to take parental leave. I don't know if it's required that, they should have some use it or lose it part for the men to encourage them to take parental leave and nurture their kids.
Definitely. It's varied, but it's changing, and it's changed recently, and I can't remember precisely what. So I think in some private sector companies, there is actually one company that started to offer a year of paid parental leave for either parent. So even if you're not the one who gave birth, you still have the opportunity to access that. So I mean, for us, we get 12 weeks of paid parental leave, and we can have time. Like I took a year off when I had my child. Mm-hmm. So you still have that security of the job waiting for you. The money runs out before then, but you do have that time available to you and that job security when you come back. So I think it's a minimum 6 or 12 weeks for mums or the person who has given birth or who is the primary caregiver of the child, and then it used to be a fortnight for the secondary carer. So it's a little bit of time, but I think they've actually made it longer now. I think maybe it might be up to 6 weeks for them as well.
Okay, yeah, it's similar in Canada. I think it's not paid parental leave, but they have to keep your job for you if you take the time off. And I think they've gone up to 18 months now, combined between the two parents.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, that's a really good step in the right direction.
It's good, but I think you need to go even further. I think you need to overcome the social stigma of men taking time off, because otherwise they won't take it. I know when I had my first child, I was like, I'm in my career, I need to stay here, and there's definitely a stigma that needs to be worked at, I think, or broken down.
Yeah, there is, and it's international. Like we moved overseas when our daughter was very little, and my husband was taking care of her, so he was wearing her in a baby carrier. She was only probably about 9 months old, and he was stopped in a shopping mall by a woman from the local culture with her child saying, "What are you doing wearing that child? Where is the mother? You are shaming yourself by wearing this child." And so
wow.
It was kind of one of those, okay, there's a lot of work to do here internationally. And yeah, it's interesting. And to me, it does come back to dads are missing out. Like, don't get me wrong, raising kids is hard yards, and there are some days that feel like they last a year. But within each of those, there are really special moments as well, which dads often don't get to see and experience, and that's to their detriment, and it's a shame.
Yeah, for sure. I touched on some of these issues in a previous podcast that I did on the parental gap and how that affects income gaps, and I think it's doubly applicable here in STEM fields. I think also, because of these unequal responsibilities in the home that exist, women have been leaving the workforce during the pandemic in much higher numbers than men. I see that I think this is going to have a big effect on our equity levels going forward, and we're going to have to work doubly hard to fix this.
Absolutely. It's happening everywhere. So you have obviously the casualization of the academic workforce. You have people living from contract to contract with no certainty. They were a lot of the ones that immediately lost their jobs, and quite a few, the majority of them, at least in our context, were female, and admin staff. But the other thing that people noticed, journal editors were noticing during the pandemic, is the number of papers submitted went up by at least 50%, but only for men. So some journals saw this massive uptick, but it was all male authors because the women were trying to write papers or put together a grant while homeschooling. And yeah, it was, I saw a great tweet, and it was some woman saying, the next person who told me that to tell me that Isaac Newton invented calculus while in lockdown is going to receive my 3-year-old in the mail.
Oh, I know what you think.
This is this kid playing in a box. I was like, yep.
Yeah, we've been homeschooling our kindergartner throughout this, and that's not a job that I had planned for, and I'm starting to feel that kindergarten teachers are underpaid.
Definitely. Yes. All teachers. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, so there's a lot of good factors to keep aware of. I think there are also additional expectations on women once they get into STEM fields to try to pull other women into the field. So there's an extra responsibility that these women feel to be active in trying to equalize the workforce. You go to a women in STEM event, it's of course all women in these events, running the events, organizing it, trying to reach out, do presentations, be role models. What's the responsibility of men who have gotten positions in STEM to help address this, to address gender equity?
Really, I think they need to be allies and to step up and shoulder some of this work. And they need to be the ones to help call out the bad behaviour. So there's so many things here. So yeah, you have these women in STEM events, and you have often the same women who are representing all women on the different committees. So particularly if you are a woman of colour or a woman who identifies as having a disability, then you are invited onto every committee known to man because, oh, look, you feel quite a few of our diversity characteristics. That's wonderful. Thank you. But then that puts this inordinate burden on individuals, which again takes time away from their ability to teach, to research, to write grant applications. And so it becomes this horrifying, untenable position of fight for your gender and people similar to you, or work on your own career. And you can't ask people to make that decision either. So realistically, I think if there is a women in STEM event, I think the knee-jerk response is often for men to go, well, that's not for me, or maybe I won't be welcome there, or maybe I shouldn't contribute to this. No, absolutely. Please do, get involved, help organize, show support, be a part of the process, because it's about changing norms. And we can only do that if people see them starting to change. And maybe that might be a bridge too far for some. So then it's a case of, okay, be aware if you are in a team meeting, for example, be aware of how people are responding to each other. Is there someone that never gets to speak up, male or female? Is there someone who makes a suggestion, it isn't really acknowledged or listened to, but someone more dominant says exactly the same thing and they get all the credit? Call it back. If you think it's a good idea and people are walking past it, bring attention back to it. There are lots of little ways that you can help to support and to elevate the voice of women and minoritized groups without having to put on a shirt, wave a flag, do any of those things. So there are tiny little things that you can do that would honestly make so much difference, because it's these tiny little microaggressions every single day, which really, they're kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back in the end.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's something that I've learned over the years and become more aware of. The more, originally I was completely ignorant to a lot of these things, and I would talk over women in meetings, or I just without thinking. And I've become much more aware of dynamics of people being dominant speakers and allowing other people to express their opinion who aren't so dominant in the conversation. And it's something I hadn't even thought of, right? And a lot of these things are things that you don't think about until you do think about them, I guess.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, I think if you don't have it done to you, you don't conceive that it happens to other people. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm very aware that I'm a white, middle-class, cisgender woman in a fairly female female dominated, or at least an equitable discipline. So my experience is going to be extraordinarily different to a woman of colour with a disability who is from a different cultural background, working in something like computer science or engineering. So you can't sort of use your own experience. The other really good thing about having that level of self-awareness that you've described is it makes you a more efficient, effective, pleasant, productive member of a team, and a better manager, supervisor, mentor. So it's not even, if it's not palatable to someone to go, oh, I don't need to help others like that, think of it as, okay, then if you aspire to levels of leadership and you need to demonstrate leadership and bring people along with you, then maybe by being a decent human being, you can actually help yourself. Who knows?
Indeed.
Now I'm getting cynical. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. And thank you for the compliment. Another thing that someone I interviewed brought up was the fact that there seems to be a cult of genius in some heavily male-dominated disciplines where people identify the very top end as men because of physical or whatever theories they have, but there's this cult that is exclusive to women. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, in various forms. They exist everywhere. Not necessarily like you can replace the word genius with anything else, but yeah, there is this sense of you're different. You don't think about things the same way as us, so you probably won't feel comfortable here, and that can be very explicit and overt, gentlemen's clubs, or it can be more subtle and insidious, and it's getting back to those microaggressions that we were talking about just before. So, yeah, I think, and it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, ultimately, human beings are herd animals. Nobody likes being isolated and out by themselves. They do like to belong to a particular group, and so you would have noticed in my bio, it was a conscious use of the word public. So in science communication, we don't talk about the general public as being one amorphous blob. There are lots of groups that are gathered around similar interests and identities, and it's those groups which we use to help build our sense of identity and everything else. So it's understandable that people sort of cluster around these common things. It's just unfortunate that tends to happen to the exclusion of others. But look, I look at any high school will tell you where that starts.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned earlier about the, I'm interested, I just twigged a little bit, the men submitting more papers. Is that published data, or is that, do you have where'd you get that information from?
Now, I don't know if it's been, I haven't followed it up. So it was more anecdata from journal editors, which I think it came out about May or June last year. So it's based on their submissions data. So not peer reviewed, but certainly a process of peer review has gone on there.
A data source.
And it wasn't across. Yeah, it is a data source, definitely. So it wasn't from gut feel. It was definitely more than one journal editor going, this is new. Okay, interesting. So yeah, and I don't know if it was discipline specific. I think it did appear in the humanities as well, which you'd expect. There are women in humanities too. So yeah, I think it would be interesting. I'm sure there are papers out there on it now. I'm sure.
That is an interesting observation, and very goes right to the societal bias of child rearing is a woman's job. So
definitely,
this has been very interesting. So, what about your current research? What are you working on right now?
Right now, what am I going to actually think? So it's like I know I have research there somewhere. So right now, it's kind of a broad exploration of stuff. So one of the projects is looking at representations of science in the media. So looking at what disciplines sort of get cut through, but who is actually the face of Australian science? So who's writing about it, who's being quoted directly or indirectly, and how are they being presented? Like, is it actually incorporating any other kind of diversity characteristics? So that's about a 3-year project and a very large spreadsheet. So I'm hoping to get that finished by the end of this year with the help of some students. I work with another sort of regional network, and we have a strong focus on intersectionality. So helping universities and research organisations understand intersectionality and how that affects the employees in their workplace. So we have what we call an intersectionality walk, where people assume personas. So they're given all of these characteristics, and then they stand in a circle and they're read a scenario. They're just starting a new job, and so they're read scenarios about their first week. And at the end of each short scenario, if they can't participate fully based on what they understand of their persona, they take a step back. And so at the end of this first run through, you have 1 or 2 people who are really close to their starting point, and then so many other people have taken 5, 10, 15 steps away from where they've started because of the tiny little things along the way that have prevented them from fully engaging and contributing in their new role. And so then we get people to talk about, okay, well, how can we make life better for your persona? What kind of things could you implement in this workplace? And so we make all of those changes that they suggest, and then they do the walk again. And some people still do have to take a step back, but the end result is everybody is so much closer to the centre. And it's extremely powerful because it gets people to literally put themselves in somebody else's shoes and experience what it would be like for them. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. And
that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, just trying to roll that everywhere.
Could you just give a quick definition of intersectionality, because it's not a term that I'm familiar with?
Sure, sorry. It was originally coined by a legal scholar in the United States, Kimberly Crenshaw. So she identified intersectionality as the overlapping disadvantage brought upon, like created and compounded because of the different identities that you have. So, the example I gave before, I'm a white, cisgender, middle-class woman in a roughly female-dominant field, whereas I have, a friend who is a trans woman working in primary education, actually secondary education, and who has found, that has been quite different. And then you might find somebody else who is from a cultural background, a language other than English. They might be from a low socioeconomic area. They might be a person of colour. They might also be gay. And so you get all of these characteristics, and each comes with their own particular biases perpetrated against them or barriers, and they all compound. And so it's not just about, if we address the gender inequity, then everything's going to be fixed. Well, no, because it's going to fix it for some women, but not for all of them. So it might work for women, but is it going to work for women of colour just as well? Is it going to work for women of colour with a disability just as well? So intersectionality is just about that overlapping and compounding disadvantage.
Okay, yeah, I could tell by context, but that's very helpful to have that definition. And that does seem to be a very powerful exercise to work through, to put these people in the shoes of others, because I think that's the first step is to make people think about or be empathic to others that don't have the same set of circumstances. I guess it's easy to have the circumstances of others be invisible if you're not forced to think about them. So that's a very good way to do it. I like that approach.
Thank you. You do too.
But so you actually go on the radio, you say, and doing science communication. That's pretty cool. Tell me about that.
I do that with a couple of my colleagues. We sort of have a rotating roster. So with the national broadcaster in Australia, they lots of different programs targeting the entire country, different areas. So we go on and we generally pick 3 science stories of interest. So research papers that might have come out, press releases. So in one night, I can be talking about anything from astrophysics, probably badly, medicine, mental health, environmental stuff. It's a really broad gamut. It's fantastic, but utterly terrifying because you're talking about someone else's research. Oh, yeah. And you don't always, actually, you rarely, if ever, get given the script beforehand. So you have to try and predict what the producers and the presenters are going to find interesting and going to ask questions about, which may take you on a bit of a tangent.
So you're not researching these in advance. You're not given. You actually have to do this. You're put on the spot.
Pretty much. So yeah, if I'm lucky, I might get 12 hours of knowing what I'm going to talk about. But generally, it's trying to cram about 3 research papers into about an hour of prep. So it's a bit of a white knuckle right at time.
That sounds like a lot of fun, though.
It is. You do learn a lot.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've enjoyed quite a bit about communicating on the podcast, researching quite a bit of things, and it's the breadth of things that really interests me, and especially communicating science. It's something that's one of the reasons that I started this podcast is to provide a rational, balanced view on current social issues and public policy, because things seem to be going off the rails.
Yeah, there's so much information that people have available to them now, and so the trusted spokesperson role can be picked up by so many people, and the ability to try and verify information. If you don't know, it's not even a matter of understanding the science, it's understanding what is actually a reliable, valid study and who is a reliable information source. So having the basic information literacy skills as well. It's a mess out there. It's awful.
Yeah, social media has really messed us up, I think, in a lot of ways. It kind of presents these echo chambers where you can feel supported in whatever position you decide to take. And it's very comfortable for people of all beliefs.
Oh, yeah, we like finding our own little tribe and the people who think and feel the same way as we do. It's very reassuring.
I think that seems to be the best thing that social media does, is find other people with the same beliefs as you. It's failing horribly to filter any of these beliefs or challenge them.
Yeah. It definitely is. I think it's a good challenge, and I've had somebody recommend this before. Create a social media account that is just your spare, and it's you do sort of the anti-you. So you create a profile that is based on your exact opposite, and you follow people that have views diametrically opposed to you. So that way you have your own profile, but then you have your anti-profile, and that will expose you to the other side of thinking and different opinions and different ideas. So you're still going to get the algorithm effects of social media, but you're going to get 2 very different ends. And so that's sort of a way of looking inside your own information bubble and just making sure it is diverse and healthy in there. Although, some of the things which you may usher in with your anti-bubble may not be helpful for you, but,
It's very hard to do. One of the reasons I started this as well is that I get drawn into these battles with people on the internet, and they just go down a rabbit hole of pain. And because it's such an impersonal interface, people are happy to yell and throw expletives and just be rude, and it rarely seems to be civil. I mean, what we need is a civil way to discuss our differences and realize that we're all people. because it's easy to caricature the other side, the way these things are set up, and most groups do. I mean, all groups do. It's just you caricature the other side and you laugh at them, and you have groups that are doing this on both sides of every issue, as far as I've found.
Yeah, absolutely. Both sides are doing it, and it is one of those things where what is your end goal? Is it to keep open the dialogue, or just to prove that you're right? And if you want to just assert your dominance and the power of your intellect over everyone, then look, the internet, you could live there quite happily forever, because you're always going to find someone who disagrees with you. But I think a question that we get asked a lot in workshops that we run for scientists and researchers and policymakers is, how do we deal with these contested spaces? And it's like you say, you have to let go of the science and the facts for a minute and just connect with the other person as a person. So listening underneath the resistance, why are they actually against this particular thing? Because quite often it's not the vaccination or the policy or the whatever which they are adamant and opposed to. It's something underneath which is driving that, be it fear for themselves, their family, their children, concerns about economic futures or sustainability or any of those things. And so if you start to connect on those values and beliefs instead, then you may still never agree, but at least you're still connecting as humans, and you can find that common ground to talk to each other. And that can help at least, keep things slightly more civil, perhaps. Not for everyone, perhaps.
No, that's very good advice, and I've been given that several times, and I think that is key for the people that want to make a difference. You need to not come in guns blazing and arguing about the truth, because it just makes people clam up. You have to reach out and make personal connections. And realize that the people on the other side are not all evil.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been a lot of fun chatting with you. I'm getting towards the end of our time period here. I'd like to ask you a question that I ask a lot of my guests, and that is, what's your favorite science fiction? Do you like books, TVs? Is there movies? Anything in particular that you like?
Look, I am a Star Wars person.
Star Wars, yes.
Star Wars, yeah, but the originals. I mean, the later stuff was good, but I still like the original. I don't mind the odd book. And I guess, something that you can sit down and watch, Star Trek Voyager. That was pretty good.
yes. That was a good series.
Yeah.
Need to revisit that. I think it's on Netflix.
Everything's on Netflix.
Well, thank you very much, Merryn, for coming and chatting with us. Really appreciate you coming and giving us the value of your research and your work. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Where's my cursor? There we go. If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.